We shall be so happy once you get here. My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever.
Hi, I'm Amalia Howard, playwright and actor, and I would like to invite you to join us with South Bank Theater Company for the unbelievably true tale of Indiana's first serial killer, Belle Gunnis. April 23rd to May 3rd at Shelton Auditorium, you can come out to the true crime dark comedy Hell's Bell. Go to butlerartscenter.org and search Bell for tickets.
Dark Discoveries is a podcast that dives deep into the darkest corners of history, mystery, and the downright bizarre. We discuss real events that may include graphic detail, adult themes, strong language, not suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
We're here to inform, entertain, and maybe make you laugh nervously in public, but never to glorify criminals or make light of victims. Our research is thorough, but hey, we're not perfect.
We don't claim to be historians, so if we get something slightly off, blame Dustin. All opinions are our own, and sometimes even those are questionable.
Welcome back to Dark Discoveries. I'm your host, Dustin, and I am with
Jimbo.
So tonight we're going to step into the squared circle, and we're going to talk about one of the greatest sports tragedies that ever happened. But first, we got a question to ask Jimbo.
Just bring it.
What is your
My
Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling?
Mine or who I think
yours?
Should be. So mine. All right. My personal Mount Rushmore. Hulk Hogan, number one. No questions. It's got to be Hulk Hogan. No professional wrestler ever affected me as much as Hulk Hogan did. From a very small kid, ripping his shirt. We'd go to all of his shows here in Indianapolis. Rip his shirt off, throw it to the crowd. He'd get beat down half the match. Then he'd start hulking up, and then everybody knew.
I wonder where John Cena got that at then. Get your butt kicked all match and then come back and win.
Right. So definitely Hulk Hogan's number one. Probably my second favorite wrestler of all time. Give me the Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody could jump up to the top rope like him, man. He made it look so easy, just stepping up. And he would stand on top of there for hours. You know what I mean? Like, just stand there. And I mean, just have that much charisma and balance. So we got Hogan and we got the Macho Man.
We got the Mega Powers kicking it off.
The 90s, the whole Attitude Era had a whole slew of people. But for me, number three's got to be Bret the Hitman Hart. Okay. The Hitman, the excellence of execution. Outside of Hogan, he's probably another one that influenced me because after Hogan left and everything that happened, Bret kind of carried the torch there for a while. And as a kid, pink was cool, pink and black.
Hot pink and black.
Yep. And my personal number 4 favorite, this is where it gets a little tricky because I am choosing somebody that he did main event at WrestleMania. He wasn't very popular.
It's your Mount Rushmore right now.
So with my number 4, give me King Kong Bundy.
That's yours.
I liked King Kong Bundy. I think he was an underrated wrestler. He was a monster. WrestleMania 2, Hogan versus Bundy in the steel cage. And then I'll never forget, WrestleMania 1, when it was him versus SP Special Delivery Jones. He got whipped in the corner. Bundy went and squashed him and then splashed him, and it was over in 9 seconds. And it was a record then. And Jimmy Hart's just going crazy, jumping up and down. Now, I'm throwing in a bonus. On my side of Mount Rushmore is my personal Mount Rushmore manager.
Okay.
And there's only one answer here. And it's got to be both of ours. And he's got to be the greatest manager of all time. And that, of course, is Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yes.
You cannot go wrong with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Jimmy Hart's a close second. I like Jimmy Hart. Think he's great. But give me Bobby the Brain Heenan, because you just hated that guy. And he got the most out of the audience that he could.
Yep, and he spent some time in Indianapolis.
He did.
It's a good. I think he lived with his aunt here.
Yeah, he was. He used to wrestle like downtown at the Tyndall Armory or the Fairgrounds. One of the
it's
two.
crazy how small the world is. So, my personal Mount Rushmore.
Here we go.
And
Disco Inferno.
The theme of where we're going is our personal. It's the generation you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, first person on my Mount Rushmore, it's a tough one, and you're going to laugh at the first one, but they were knocked out by the second person. Crush was my favorite as a young kid.
Was it Crush before he joined Demolition, or
it was Crush in like early 90s? Then I think who knocks Crush out of that spot.
So is Crush number one?
No.
Oh, he's number four?
Crush, there's no order.
Oh, okay.
I don't think. You can mix them. You can put them anywhere. But I think Razor Ramon pushes Crush off of my personal Mount Rushmore, because
you can't be pushing. This is your top four. You can't have six people and keep pushing them off to the side.
I know. And that was one of the toughest ones. Like, man, I was a big Crush fan. But Scott Hall, a.k.a. Razor Ramon, I think he pushes Crush off the list, and Scott Hall is my first person. Second person, hands down, if you know me, Rey Mysterio Jr. In the 90s,
You've talked about it
late 90s, early 2000s, there was nobody better to watch in the ring. And behind Mysterio is all those other great luchadors that were with him. Because without them, I mean, just like King Kong Bundy, he had to set the stage for Hogan for you to hate him. Even if he crushed people or it was a lousy match, he set that up to where you believed hook, line, and sinker that Hulkamania was going to run wild over him. And he did. So that's my first two. Number 3, Chris Jericho. I don't think there's anybody more versatile. His latest work isn't the greatest, but I think his late WCW work, Man of 1,001 4 holds and going through the list, there was just, the undercard was so stacked. I was hardcore WCW. I would dabble into, on the commercials, I would go over to the other side.
And see, I was the exact opposite. If you notice our list, they're coinciding with what you watched.
Exactly. That's why it's your personal. And probably Stone Cold Steve Austin, because at the end of it, there was nobody bigger. And he is the first person who would draw you over into the other side. You wanted to see what he did. So that's my top 4. Bobby Heenan, obviously the greatest manager. If you have a Mount Rushmore of managers, Heenan, Paul E. Dangerously.
I mean, you got Freddie Classy Blassie, Mr.
Jim
Fuji.
Cornette.
Cornette was great.
And then I don't know if Jimmy Hart would make my top 4.
Well, you're wrong, because he had some that he listed.
My top 4.
Well, your top 4.
My
I'm
top
just
4.
saying. So now let's talk about who deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore. Not your personal favorites.
Yeah, the greatest of all time.
Okay. So we're going to kick it off with Hulk Hogan, because Hulk Hogan transformed it from wrestling to sports entertainment. He made more money probably for Vince McMahon than anybody during that
he was
time.
the biggest thing.
He's the torchbearer.
When it took its change, he was the one that benefited the most.
Would you agree with Hulk Hogan being on there?
Only for the impact, not the in-ring ability.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, because a leg drop's not really going to do anything.
No, but it's one of those, he's what pushed it into the mainstream.
I'll let you give a number 2, and then we'll...
Number 2, I'm going to take somebody probably more for their NWA days. And I'm not a really big fan as a person or wrestler, but Ric Flair. he was able to go to every territory. He lived the gimmick. He won championships everywhere he went. He was a draw. He was the heel, so you have to have that heel
He was jet flying, limousine riding, kiss stealing son of a gun.
But it's the impact that he had. So I think that
he was basically Hulk Hogan for NWA and WCW.
For the end of the territories into the change. I would say Ric Flair.
All right, number 3. You're going to have to give me Andre the Giant. Nobody in the history of wrestling was a physical attraction than Andre the Giant.
I don't think that's enough to put yourself on Mount Rushmore. So,
what? Are you crazy? Okay, Jerry Lawler then. We'll put Jerry the King Lawler in there as a wrestler, not a commentator. For what he did in Memphis wrestling.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You know, and then you get into Texas and all that stuff, which makes it extremely difficult.
Yeah, because start talking about the Von Erichs and everybody.
Yeah.
But for me, I'd probably put Lawler and Andre as my last 2.
And the hardest one, I wouldn't put Lawler personally. I get where you're going. If I wouldn't have put Flair, Lawler would have took, I think, that. But I think Flair's impact was a little bit bigger. I wish guys like Kurt Hennig would have lived longer because I think their impact could have been a lot greater than it was.
I mean, let's look narrowing this the Mount Rushmore. I think I think Hogan and Flair are definitely going to be 2 up there. When you get to the other 2, there's been so many greats. I mean, you're talking about HBK. Yeah. You're talking about Undertaker. You're talking about all these people.
But you're not talking about
Stone Cold. You're talking about The Rock. You're talking about John Cena.
Impact.
You're talking about all of them.
Impact. I think my 3rd would be Junkyard Dog.
Dude, great.
I think that's a guy that when you look at their impact for what he did in the time that he didn't necessarily get always the biggest push, but the cultural impact, I would say JYD. And then you're into that last spot. There's 30 honorable mentions.
Yes, there is.
And you're looking at that.
But see, we're looking at 80s and 90s. And even some 70s.
I'm trying to take a little bit from everybody.
You're talking about like Nick Bockwinkel. Yep. You're talking about what's his name? I see him in my Bruno Sammartino.
Yeah.
He's probably on there, honestly, if we're being honest.
Yeah. But like, do you go with somebody like Roddy Piper who didn't need a title?
Jake the Snake
Roberts who didn't need a title? So what I'm going to do, my fourth. If you guys are listening and you are a wrestling fan, I need you to email us, darkdiscoverieспod@gmail.com, and tell us who the 4th man is.
Well, probably 3rd and 4th since we've had differing opinions.
I just want the 4th man. Who's the 4th man? Guys like Sting, man, they were loyal, but I think Flair taking that spot takes that spot away from Sting.
Well, Undertaker having the greatest gimmick of all time that lasted 35 years or whatever without breaking kayfabe.
He was impressive, but it's one of those.
I mean, you could talk about Yokozuna.
If you didn't have I don't think his impact was enough. I'm talking, and maybe that is out of that, but does Undertaker deserve it more than Austin or The Rock? Or The Rock's, to me, The Rock was great, but his run wasn't long enough.
Right, exactly.
Taker had a long run, but he had some big absences too.
Right. I mean, but we didn't. I mean, there's Edge. There's all kinds of people.
I was an edgehead before edgeheads, but he's there's so many.
So I think you got to go back further, and I think you have to throw in.
You have to probably
Fritz Von Erich or whoever. You know what I mean?
You have somebody. I think you have to go in a different generation because.
Okay, who we putting up as the number 1 women's wrestler? We'll just put one spot on Rushmore for the women's wrestler.
I think Lita's one of the best all around female wrestlers.
I think Fabulous Moolah.
She was an attraction, and it was a different style.
And she would wrestle men too, and stuff like that. So
Lita trained with men. She had a very athletic style. Frankensteiner's Hurricane Rana. She was doing all the stuff, training with the guys, and it as a female wrestler, I think it put her above everybody, in my opinion, because she actually was a wrestler and not brawling panties and trying to work a different style.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
Well, Dustin, I think we better get to the topic at hand, or we just sit here and talk an hour about.
So this has been a long one in the making, and it's not going to be a quick one. It could be 2 parts, could be one. Depends on what we want to do. And it's just we're going to play by ear. Probably the most notes we've ever had. So with that, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of one Chris Benoit. And like we always do, we're going to just throw out this little disclaimer. We're not glorifying anything that he did. It's hard as a person who liked Chris Benoit as a wrestler. Definitely could have been on that Mount Rushmore list if things would have went differently. To me, super technical, very clean, very tight. If you want a guy representing your company and whatever trait, this guy would have been so freaking good at a lot of different roles, but I'm going to say it's probably going to be a lot of head injuries and different things.
I mean, when you do that flying headbutt off the rope every match,
and and a lot of that chair shots, and you took it with a badge of honor to take these injuries and keep working. So nothing that happened we want to glorify. We're just telling the story.
Because this is more, even though it's a professional wrestler, it's also a true crime story. Let's face the facts. So.
And if you're not a avid wrestling fan or a wrestling fan at all, and you've kept listening to this point, please listen. It's a
tragic story.
It's a tragic story. There's a lot to it. It's got a little bit of everything. You got some conspiracies, which most are bogus, but you see the downfall of what head injuries I think can do. So with that being said, let's get started because we're probably 30 minutes in already. Have you ever noticed that some stories don't start dark? They become dark. They slowly make a transition, like the lights slowly dimming in a room where you don't even notice. That's how the Benoit story feels. A man who for decades was celebrated as one of the greatest in-ring technicians in professional wrestling, bar none, only to have his ending rewrite everything that came before. But before we get to the horrors, before the spiral, the violence, the crime scene, the conspiracy theories, let's go back. Let's see who Chris Benoit was before the world turned on him. Chris Benoit was born May 21st, 1967 in Montreal. He was raised in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, home to brutally cold weather and hockey. As a kid, Benoit worshipped in-ring technicians like the Dynamite Kid and guys like Bret Hart. This wasn't your typical I want to be a wrestler when I grew up story. This is a man who studied the craft like it was a religion. He wasn't trying to be famous. He was trying to be the best. A dangerous foundation because perfection rarely ends. Let me reread that. I was doing so good. A dangerous foundation because perfection rarely ends like you want it to, but it comes at a cost. I messed that line up in my notes, just so you guys know. So inside baseball.
By 18, Benoit was training in the legendary Hard Dungeon. And the Hard Dungeon, that's where a lot of Canadians went. I mean, you're talking...
It's a who's who. It's a who's who of who trained there.
Right. And an experience often described as half wrestling school, half Guantanamo Bay because he put them through it. So Stu Hart, he stretched his students until their tendons begged for mercy. And Benoit, he just took it with a smile. He lived for it. Stu saw something in him early, that intensity, that laser focus, that obsessive fire. There was no charisma, no jokes, no flash, just work. Hard work, painful work, relentless work. Benoit wasn't built like Hulk Hogan. He wasn't even built like the Ultimate Warrior. He wasn't 6'7" with 24-inch pythons that will run wild on you, brother. He stood 5'11" and was a compact ball of muscle and tension, like if someone sculpted a pit bull out of bowling balls. But when he wrestled, it was an art. All precision, all technique. The man could make a basic wrist lock look intense and painful, and fans loved him for it. They loved him because he earned that love the hard way, with sweat, with blood. I'm sure there were tears, but also with a style that looked like could draw you in with a hook, line, and sinker. Benoit began wrestling in Stampede Wrestling for Stu Hart in 1985, where he began paying his dues.
So a funny thing, you're talking about the Hart Foundation.
That's my favorite.
And, not the Hart Foundation, the Hart Dungeon. They talk about different wrestlers going in there. And this is a time in wrestling, towards the end of it, but still guys would go get stretched. They'd beat the crap out of them. And the guys who came back would eventually you'd have to come back and back. Those were the guys that would get trained. They were still in a time that they're keeping everything like it's real, like it's on the up and up. It's not predetermined. So it was hard to break into the business back then. Towards the end of it, but still tough. But they talked about some of these guys that were training. The Hart house, I guess, was full of cats. And I heard a story. A cat took a shit on the counter while Stu was cooking breakfast. And he took the spatula, flipped it off, and then right back into the eggs.
Protein. Well, that reminds me, like you talk about being trained. I remember reading Hulk Hogan's biography years ago, and I do believe it was the Sheik that he was going to get trained by. And he walked in, just agreeing, hey, I want to get trained. He's like, all right. He said, well, get in the ring. And he broke his leg.
Yeah, they broke his leg on purpose to see if he'd come back.
And he's like, they didn't think I was going to come back. So he said, I made sure I came back. And that's when they knew that he was serious and they would take him serious.
That's how it was back then.
Yep.
So by 1986, Benoit would travel to Japan where he would train with New Japan Pro Wrestling, learning to work the Japanese style, which really helped develop Benoit's style. Benoit would then come to the U.S. where he started to work with ECW, kind of more of a hardcore outlaw promotion. But it's one of those, if you're listening to us, you know exactly what ECW was. It was kind of the minor leagues of wrestling, but the impact that they had, the guys that came through ECW, Mysterio, Benoit,
Dudley
Jericho,
Boys.
There was so many guys that came through before you ever knew them. That was their first break in the U.S. And man, it was something special back then. Here he would adapt a little bit more of a harder hitting style. This is where he would really start to learn the psychology of American wrestling and where he earned the nickname the Crippler after a botched move that would break fellow wrestler Sabu's neck.
You ever seen that video?
I have, and I know most of the blame, I think, honestly goes to Sabu. I think it's maybe it's more of a 50-50, but it's kind of one of those things.
I don't think he got him all the way clear. You know what I mean? It's just.
I think it was kind of botched on both sides. This is where Benoit, though, he would meet Martina in the late 1980s when he was still rising up through the ranks as a young wrestler in Stampede. The Calgary-based promotion ran by the Hart family. At the time, he was still training at the legendary Hart Dungeon and developing his reputation as a intense, disciplined, technical wrestler. So he met Martina. They met through some mutual friends, and they kind of started dating. So they crossed a lot of paths. So this is where he started to develop that relationship.
Right. So the relationship began during a period when Benoit was largely focused on building his career. Friends described Martina as supportive, private, and grounded. Someone who helped stabilize Benoit during a time when wrestling was chaotic, low-paying, and physically punishing. You got to remember, these guys aren't getting paid money. They're not getting put up in hotels. You had to get from one city to the other city on your own dime.
And you have to remember too, Stampede is a Canadian promotion.
Mm-hmm.
They're driving across some of the coldest places in vans and little cars, probably getting paid off, $20 in a damn hot dog. I mean, it wasn't, you're putting the ring together, tearing it down. You're not there. You're getting on some TV and you're in kind of like the major leagues for Canada, but the major leagues in Canada isn't AA or single A ball here.
So by the time Benoit began traveling internationally to Japan to wrestle for New Japan Pro Wrestling, or NJPW, the two had grown serious. They married in 1988 when Benoit was still very young, and soon after had two children, David and Megan. While Martina stayed in Calgary to raise their kids, Benoit's career demanded long stretches overseas. in Japan for weeks at a time, sometimes even months. The long-distance strain, combined with Benoit's increasingly consuming dedication to wrestling, reportedly wore heavily on the marriage.
When WCW came calling, this would put Benoit on the national stage for the first time. WCW was owned by Ted Turner, who owned TNT, TBS, CNN, and most importantly, the Atlanta Braves.
Sucks.
Not, well, they do, but that's too...
That's Dustin's favorite baseball
That
team.
is to be talked about later, and I just lost my spot. So here I am putting this awesome episode together, and I'm losing my spot because I hit the wrong button. But the Braves don't suck. Things are starting to look up for young Benoit. He rose in WCW and was part of the Four Horsemen, which was Flair.
Arn Anderson.
In WCW, it was Flair, Benoit, because they had different younger guys in it.
I don't know. There was so many different iterations of it. I know Arn Anderson was in there at times. There was Mongo McMichael was in there.
Mongo, I think, was in it in WCW. Man, I had that when I wrote this in my head. So, but with that being said, he's finally getting the recognition he's fought for this whole time. This is where you met Nancy Sullivan, the wife of fellow wrestler Kevin Sullivan, who is another piece in the story and will eventually, take kind of a dark turn. But the relationship between Chris and Nancy Sullivan didn't begin in a traditional romantic way. It began as a storyline. The unexpected became real life. And one of the most infamous examples of kayfabe bleeding into reality. So the wrestling work, what do we want to call it? Like
The wrestling angle?
No, like art imitating life. Yeah. Like real life starts to get involved in this. So Nancy was married to Kevin Sullivan. And, I don't want to go. Well, we'll go. Kevin Sullivan, his character, the Taskmaster, was kind of a darker, satanic type character. And in the storyline, they brought in Nancy, his wife, who was a valet, a manager, named a woman, a seductive, manipulative valet that he crafted for her. In 1996, Kevin Sullivan booked himself into a feud with Chris Benoit as part of the major storyline at the time. And
things are about to turn, ain't they?
Tides are turning.
So Benoit and Nancy, who was going as a woman, would begin their, quote, affair behind Kevin's back. Kevin believed that building real-life tension would sell the feud. He famously said, quote, to make it work, we have to live the angle. So Benoit and Nancy Sullivan were told to travel together, eat together, and to share hotel rooms and act like a couple in public. They wanted to make the affair to look real. Spending that much time together created a genuine emotional bond. Benoit was shy, intense, private, and deeply respectful, a contrast to Kevin Sullivan's loud, abrasive personality. Nancy found herself drawn to Chris in a way she didn't expect. What began as an act turned quickly into real feelings for Chris. By 1997, the fake affair had become an actual relationship. The line between storyline and reality was so blurred that even other wrestlers weren't sure when the acting stopped and the affair genuinely began. The marriage between Kevin and Nancy collapsed quickly once the Benoit relationship became real.
Nancy separated from Kevin and filed for divorce. When Nancy separated from Kevin Sullivan in 1997, she filed paperwork that included allegations of physical and emotional abuse. Wrestlers have repeatedly said that Kevin's dark cult leader gimmick sometimes bled into his personal, there's life. He's not here to defend himself. We don't know. We weren't there. But, he really wasn't necessarily, as bad as they say. Who knows? Nancy reported hating to do this, and she felt that Kevin was using his position as the booker who set up all the matches and everything as a role to control her life on and off screen. So there's already some stuff going on, I think, before this. There's trouble in paradise before Benoit comes in. He's just kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back. So this all caused enormous heat in the WCW locker room. Kevin Sullivan was the booker with the power. Some wrestlers feared Benoit's career could suffer. Despite tensions backstage, Nancy and Benoit would stay together. Their infamous series of matches in the 1996-1997 Benoit versus Sullivan reflected real-life aggression. Many wrestlers later said that those matches contained genuine anger and emotion. They were stiff, physical, and fueled by personal turmoil. By the early 2000s, Benoit and Nancy were living together full-time. They had a son, Daniel, in 2000, and eventually married in 2003. So before I let you take over, Jimbo, I may say this somewhere else, but a lot of people kind of behind the scenes were laughing that Kevin Sullivan booked his own divorce.
Oh, yeah.
He set the angle up, everything, and perfect storm.
Perfect angle.
Perfect. Like I said, the best things in sports entertainment are the ones that you can believe.
Yep. Even with all the drama and controversy behind Chris Benoit's work, his work was still world class. He would win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship on January 16, 2000. Benoit finally got the chance and the recognition he deserved, and this would later help give opportunities to other wrestlers who didn't fit the big man mold guys. But the very next day, he left for WWF with one of his best friends, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn. One of these is not like the same. Okay, so.
The thing that Saturn was a really talented wrestler at the time, and I think he was underutilized. But Malenko, another very tight, technical wrestler, one of the best little guys that have probably ever wrestled. And Eddie Guerrero was good, but he was about to really, I think, turn into one of the all-time greats.
Wasn't Dean Malenko a four horseman at one time too?
Malenko was. Malenko, Benoit. I feel like
was it Arn Anderson?
No, because Arn wasn't wrestling. What's his name? Mongo, because Mongo was a horseman, and I can't remember who if Flair was still in it.
There's so many iterations of it. But they would leave over disagreements with management, specifically over Kevin Sullivan being named head booker. Benoit expected repercussions due to his relationship with Sullivan's ex-wife. Benoit would debut in the WWF on January 31st, 2000. He jumped to WWE, well, it was F, and now it's E, in 2000, where he was instantly pushed as one of the best pure wrestlers in the world. And honestly, he really was. Benoit versus Angle, Benoit versus Jericho, Benoit versus anyone with a heartbeat, automatic classics. Then came the night of nights, March 14th, 2004. WrestleMania 20, Madison Square Garden. The main event, Benoit taps out Triple H with the crippler crossface. The crowd goes insane. Benoit would be celebrating in the ring with Eddie Guerrero, his best friend, two men who claw their way up from nothing, hugging in the middle of the world's biggest wrestling stage. Because I do believe that's the same WrestleMania where Guerrero won his belt too, correct? And they celebrated together.
I don't think they won together, but Eddie, because they were so tight, came out and celebrated. You know what I mean? That was his best friends. You know what I mean? You see a guy like you who shouldn't ever make it to the top of the mountain size wise.
He didn't win his belt that night too?
I don't remember.
Well, you probably weren't born yet.
Yes, I was born. Come on.
For that.
So Benoit like I said, he'd reached the top of the mountain. It was emotional. It was historic. It was a beautiful thing as a fan who watched these guys develop, and to see that, Shawn Michaels already broke that little guy mold, but Benoit, I think for that time frame, kind of put an end to the big guy. Like, you didn't have to be, 6'8", 250 pounds, huge muscles. You could be 5'11" with neck muscles to your ears. This was also the last high point of Benoit's life. Because what happens next is where the story really begins. There's a point in every true crime story where you can start to feel the tide shift, where the bright lights start to dim, the camera pulls back. You realize you're no longer watching triumph anymore, but you're starting to watch the descent. For Benoit, that shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a single event. It was a slow motion collapse built from years of injuries, trauma, grief, and stubbornness. Wrestlers always have a saying, the show must go on. But what happens when the show never stops and the body and the brain can't keep up? So let's talk about the beginning of the unraveling. After WrestleMania 20, Benoit hit his peak of his career, but in the wrestling business, those peaks don't last forever. Title runs end, injuries start to pile up, young guys start to get a push. Guys like Benoit are afraid they're going to lose their spot. Privately, Benoit was already struggling. He was a notoriously obsessive perfectionist, and the pressure of being champion made him feel responsible for every match and every ratings. All the ratings draws. As champion, you're expected to draw money, and if the fans don't go to live events, that championship, that title, that belt gets moved on to somebody else. Friends say he rarely celebrated or relaxed. Even after winning the world title, it was business as usual.
And by the way, Eddie Guerrero did win the championship from Kurt Angle at the same WrestleMania.
Okay.
I thought they celebrated with both their belts.
I don't remember seeing the belt, but it's one of those. It was just, for me, I think that part was overshadowed by just the sheer triumph, the confetti falling, and you've got two best friends who fought through a long journey that came together, you know, that were, like I said, they were small guys in a big man's world, and they were both at the peak of the mountain. They were it.
So at home, Nancy later described him as emotionally distant, always sore, always tired. It sounds like me after a full day of work, right? And unable to detach from wrestling. The one thing that was always the most important, though, was that to Benoit was starting to slip away, his family. It was the only thing that mattered outside of wrestling. It was his life, and that was starting to slip away. Benoit adored his son Daniel, and he was Daniel's hero, but he was often gone, touring constantly. Nancy and Chris had arguments about his travel schedule, isolation, and intensity. They separated briefly in 2003, but during this period, they tried to stabilize the marriage, though conflict still existed. And I do remember, I think it's scrapped from the WWE WrestleMania 20 now, but there is a spot where Daniel's in the ring celebrating with Chris, I do believe. They show his son. So I don't think you can find that footage anymore because with what happens, they scrapped all that out.
Well, I know he stays in, like, they still have the matches with him. It's not
right. But I'm talking about with his son.
I know a lot of that stuff they unedited, but because a lot of times they took him out completely for a while.
Yeah.
And now he's back. He just isn't in the description because we're going to talk about it later. It sucks for a lot of these guys who had some of the greatest matches of their careers that they can't, you don't see and talk about.
Yeah. So things would get more tense when the family moved from Peachtree City to Fayetteville, Georgia in the summer of 2005. Away from their family, away from their friends, and Nancy's support system. Nancy and Chris had arguments about his travel schedule, isolation, and intensity. But the real breaking point wasn't physical. It was mental. It was when Eddie Guerrero died on November 13, 2005. Eddie, who was Chris Benoit's best friend, travel partner, his brother in the business, was found dead in a Minnesota hotel room of heart failure. Years of addiction and stress catching up all at once. When Benoit got the news, he was devastated and he cried uncontrollably for days. He cried openly at Eddie's tribute show.
The Rabid Wolverine, his other nickname, the stoic technician sobbing uncontrollably. People backstage said he wasn't just grieving, he was broken. Wrestlers described him as being never the same again. He would carry Eddie's obituary photo in his bag everywhere he went. Benoit began isolating himself even more, not talking in the locker rooms, staying alone in hotels, and withdrawing emotionally from his family. Some friends believe this was the start of his deep clinical depression. Eddie was the one guy Benoit talked to, the only person he truly confided in, the only guy who could make him laugh. Without Eddie, Benoit drifted. He isolated himself, pulled away from the locker room. He stopped joking, stopped connecting. He trained harder, almost obsessively, to help cope with the loss of Eddie. Nancy brought him a journal where Benoit would write letters to Eddie as a way to cope with the loss. Unfortunately, this didn't help his mental state or his emotional health, and they started to decline at this point. Then came the mental change. Subtle at first, just like every descent, he got paranoid, angry, short-tempered. Benoit would become so paranoid he would take different routes to the gym and anywhere else that he would go. He would go one way, come back a separate way. He constantly thought somebody was following him, following his family. And then there's the prescription painkillers, the muscle relaxers, the testosterone. WWE doctors prescribed low levels, but then the steroid whispers start to increase.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think if Eddie Guerrero wouldn't have died, that Chris Benoit, it would have happened the way it went down?
With the way things go, I think it definitely changed him. The head injuries, it's hard to say because, as we find out later, if you're listening and you already know the story, well, they said he had a brain of an 80-year-old man. Mm-hmm. Like it was so deteriorated. Something would have happened, but there wouldn't have probably been as much rage. I guess rage is the right word, or hate. Like it just a lot of hurt. I mean, being lost. This was the guy that you guided through everything with, and to have them gone and everything was just a perfect storm. Maybe it would have been a different story if it hadn't happened, but you see a lot of it with different NFL players that have killed themselves. You wonder if it would have just maybe been a suicide or something versus what it was.
So the cocktails of substance the wrestling world normalized. Benoit was taking more and more to keep performing, to keep training, to keep functioning. And that combination, pain, trauma, grief, drugs, began rewiring him from the inside. Nancy saw it. Friends saw it. Even some wrestlers tried to intervene. Others, they just stayed silent. Then something else started happening. Something that only makes sense looking back now. Benoit began losing time. Moments he couldn't remember. Conversations he forgot. He would repeat things he'd already said. These weren't accidents. They were signs. Signs of a brain that was breaking down. By 2006 and early 2007, Benoit wasn't the same man anymore. Not the husband Nancy married. Not the father Daniel adored. Not even the friend Eddie loved. The locker room called him intense, but privately, some wrestlers said he looked haunted. Nancy reportedly told friends Benoit was becoming, quote, scary quiet at home. She confided that his moods were unpredictable, distant one day, emotional the next. They were arguing over everything, not seeing his other kids, his travel, Daniel's schooling issues, and his refusal to slow down. Police were called to their home at least once during an argument, though no charges were filed.
By early 2007, Benoit was burned out. He expressed regret about not being at home, but he still couldn't get away from wrestling. It's believed he sustained another concussion, and it's hard to know how many concussions he's had. Probably hundreds, if not more. It's just that the style of wrestling back then, guys would take unprotected headshots with chairs as a badge of honor. You didn't put your hands up. You didn't block. You're jumping off the top rope, head diving. You're hitting the mat. You're hitting shoulders. You're jogging your brain around a lot. he didn't get nothing checked out. He kept working. Like I said, guys like him, he was intense. At this point, people were afraid of losing their position, their spot on the roster. So you wrestled hurt. You didn't turn it in. Today, you get a concussion, you get hurt, they're going to pull you and take care of you. Back then, it was kind of the Wild West. Anything kind of went. There's, several matches you can go look, guys that are knocked out, still on their feet, still functioning, and finishing matches while they're blacked out. And today that would not happen. Like I said, they would take unprotected headshots with chairs. These diving headbutts, it just grew and grew and grew. Each concussion slowly changes you. Your attitude, your demeanor, all that starts to slowly change. His marriage was deteriorating again. Nancy reportedly told friends she was considering separation. In the days leading up to all their deaths, I guess. Chris Benoit's behavior became increasingly strange and confusing. Even the coworkers who knew him best were seeing it. It began when he unexpectedly missed a live event on Saturday, that Saturday leading up to everything, telling WWE officials that his wife and son were suffering from severe food poisoning and needed to stay home to take care of them. An excuse that instantly raised eyebrows because Benoit was famously reliable, almost obsessively punctual, and he rarely would miss any shows or be late for any reason.
The next day, he was scheduled to fly to Houston for the Vengeance Night of Champions pay-per-view, which I was watching live at the time, where he was set to win the ECW championship. But instead, he sent another message saying, quote, the food poisoning had worsened and Daniel, his son, was vomiting blood, claiming he needed to take his son to a hospital. Around this time, he sent a series of deeply unsettling text messages to Chavo Guerrero, Scott Armstrong, and a few other WWE contacts, all time-stamped around 3 to 5 a.m., with details that felt more like coordinates than conversation. Giving the exact location of his home, gate code, and directions to where the family's dogs were locked up, when coworkers tried calling him back in response, Benoit didn't pick up. And when he finally returned one call to Chavo, his voice sounded exhausted, monotone, and strangely distant, as though he were speaking through a fog. Still, Chavo believed he was simply overwhelmed by the supposed family emergency. By Sunday afternoon, WWE Creative began rewriting the pay-per-view because they couldn't reach him, assuming he was still dealing with a medical crisis.
So there's a lot going on at this point. So Chavo kind of takes that role Eddie had. Chavo is Eddie's nephew, another great technical wrestler, I think very underrated in his time, but they would travel together. They were getting really, really close. And one of the things that kind of was going on behind the scenes is we're talking about guys trying to protect their spot. Eddie's seen the ECW championship, not Eddie, Benoit seen it as a step down. It wasn't the level that he thought he would be at. And, when you're dealing with everything, all this stuff that's going through his head feels like you're probably being pushed out of what you love and that you're no longer able to carry on as one of the top guys, but now you're starting to fall down that card. So just a little bit behind the scenes. By Monday morning, the silence had become alarming, especially as someone as professional and as compulsively consistent as Benoit. WWE Talent Relations reportedly called, texted, and emailed him with no response. Finally, after receiving the bizarre early morning text revealing the exact layout of his home, along with his complete disappearance from all contact, WWE requested a wellness check from the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. Once deputies arrived at the Benoit residence on the afternoon of June 25th, 2007, they discovered the bodies of Chris, Nancy, and Daniel, unraveling one of the darkest moments in wrestling history. When the Fayette County Police contacted WWE on the same afternoon and confirmed that Chris Benoit and his family were dead, the company's immediate reaction was shock, confusion, and grief. no one inside WWE knew the circumstances, and at first assumption, it was shared by nearly everyone from talent relations to the wrestlers in the arena at Raw that him and his family had to have succumb to some type of tragic accident, maybe something like carbon monoxide, just something tragic had happened. Vince McMahon quickly decided to cancel that night's planned Raw taping, which was supposed to feature a storyline for his death the week before. He gets into a limo. It blows him up.
But do you remember before that he was giving away money? Do you remember that? Like,
they call you?
They call in and you try to win money from Vince McMahon.
It's one of those. I mean, it's they decide you just can't keep going on with this angle. Let's step out. Let's address this. And they would do a live 3-hour tribute on Benoit's career. Production crew scrambled to gather Benoit's best matches, interviews, career highlights, while wrestlers filmed emotional remembrance segments, all genuine grieving because of that moment. WWE as a company and as the individuals believe they had lost a beloved coworker and his family in a horrific but natural tragedy.
I was watching Raw live that night.
Oh,
were you?
Yeah, because I remember sometime earlier in the day, you got to remember we're talking about 2007. The internet's more and more taking over our lives in 2007. So I remember like logging in online to check something, and in the news, like before Raw started, it pops up that Chris Benoit's dead.
Right.
And you've got no answers. You don't know what happened. And you're like, holy crap. And we had it had been like 3 months before to a house show. I mean, you walk him come in, or you watch him, come down. We were right on the ramp, small little show. But you look back and you're like, am I imagining that he was maybe different than normal? Because when you looked at it, you're like, man, this guy's not very big, but intense and just jacked to the gills. And you look back and you're like, was there maybe a lost look on his face?
It's like he didn't have a neck either. It was like that muscle, you know what I mean?
Oh, dude, his neck muscles were like, ridiculous. They were up to his ears.
But here I think you've seen where Vince McMahon tried to do the right thing by honoring one of his wrestlers that had worked for him.
Yeah, not
before having all the facts.
Yeah.
Okay, because I remember watching this Raw. They had some matches, and they would be like, "Let's do this for Benoit or whatever." And they get out there and they're like, let's just go have a drink, and they'd leave. And then they'd had all these wrestlers talking about Benoit.
Did they do
crying.
Benoit armbands like they did Eddie?
I don't remember. I don't remember. I just remember them talking and then breaking down crying and stuff like, you know what I mean?
Because I know with Eddie, because it's sad when you have, man, like in probably a 5-year run, I don't remember all the dates, you lost Kurt Hennig. You lost Eddie Guerrero leading into it. And then, you think it's something similar because a lot of these guys had abused drugs or were still possibly abusing drugs. So overdoses and heart failure wasn't. You just assume when somebody, passed away, it was some type of drug abuse or a heart problem. And there was a stretch during this time that there was a lot, and there's more than I just mentioned, but there was a lot of guys that they lost that had, were still working or stepped away. It was a bad time.
You got to remember, Monday Night Raw was live every Monday night. Okay.
Yeah.
So as Raw was live on the air, things started to shift behind the scenes. You had the police investigators gathering more evidence and notified WWE privately that the scene in the home was, quote, suspicious, and that it did not appear to be an accident. As the memorial broadcast continued, more details trickled in through law enforcement intermediaries, each sounding worse than the last. Within hours of Raw ending, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office informed WWE that the case was officially being treated as a double murder-suicide, with Chris Benoit suspected of killing Nancy and Daniel before taking his own life. Overnight, WWE executives scrambled to remove all traces of the Benoit tribute, quietly pulling videos, articles, and match listings from their site while issuing a blunt public statement distancing the company from Benoit's action. And I do believe, is this where the the famous Vince McMahon said, "We will never mention his name again on TV."
Yeah,
he came on there. Do you remember that?
And it's sad because, here you go, like as a fan, like wrestling hit its peak in the late 90s into the early 2000s. This is probably one of the moments that really sped up the decline of it being as huge as it was to where it started to taper down. And I remember it felt like days.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're waiting to hear more and a little bit of stuff pops up and you're like, there's got to be something. And it was just, it's somebody that you had watched for the last at least decade just disappear.
So the next morning, as police shared more details, the picture became even darker. Nancy had been killed first on Friday. Then Daniel, their son, on Saturday. So their son was in the house with their mother and Benoit for a whole day after she had been dead. And then Benoit had hanged himself Sunday, meaning he performed text messaging, emails, and correspondence with coworkers while two bodies were already in the home dead. WWE officials were stunned to learn that Benoit's family emergency excuses had been lies covering the murders, and shocked that the odd location-based text messages he sent early Sunday morning were not requests for help, but instructions almost like a final breadcrumb trail.
So the thing is sometimes when you are reaching out for help and maybe some people are a little distant from you, you're not seeing them every day, it's easy to overlook some warning signs, but there was people there. So was there warning signs, or was it just kind of a moment that they snapped?
Right.
So meanwhile, the media storm has exploded. Reporters pressed WWE about steroids, painkillers, mental health, concussions, and whether they ignored Benoit's warning signs. Wrestlers in the locker room were hit even harder. Many had cried on camera during the Raw tribute only to wake up and learn that they had honored a murderer.
How would you feel?
It's a coworker and one of your friends. It's one of those, I don't know how I would feel. As a fan, I know how I felt. Some people felt betrayed. Many felt sickened. Others were blaming the business itself. As investigators continued their work, the timeline had began to grow clearer.
So, Dustin, I think what we're going to do, since we are getting ready to go into the timeline, let's go ahead and cut it off here, and we'll go ahead and record a second episode because it's already almost an hour into it.
Yeah, we don't want to lose people.
Right, and we just wanted to make sure we gave the basis of the overall story. Now we're going to start going into some of the timeline, some of the conspiracies, and everything else. So
join us on part 2 as we dive into the second chapter of this story. And I just wish that we were able to go more and talk about the highlights of what he did
for his career.
Because he was one of the greatest. But now we can't look at him that way. And we're going to talk about that as we go forward. And obviously it wouldn't be a Dark Discoveries episode if we just talked about a wrestler and his achievements. But we didn't want to glorify him as an individual, even though it's tough because there's musicians today that do extremely bad things, actors. And for me, I distance myself from those people who are not great individuals. I don't want to look up, and it's probably from this, I don't want to glorify if they are a bad person and be like, well, I can separate their music or their movies from who they were. That's who they were. But this is a little bit different because I think it wasn't necessarily a choice that you willingly did it. I think it was a perfect storm of some of the medication that you're taking to ease the pain because you're beat up, the brain injuries, the head injuries. I think it just all formed the perfect storm. And like I said, it's a tough one, but we're gonna break down what happened, what we know, and some, like I said, Jimbo said, some of the conspiracies that surround this. So join us next week, tomorrow, Wednesday, whatever day we decide to
maybe
drop
the same day. I don't know.
Yeah, hell, we'll figure it out. But
this has been Dark Discoveries.
where the deeper you dive,
The darker it gets. I don't care what Dustin says. Andre the Giant's on Mount Rushmore.
no.